My dear friends, and welcome again to my YouTube channel. In this video we're going to talk about another short story titled The Story of an Hour by Kate Chopin. Now this is the story of a young lady named Louise Mallard who receives the news of her husband's untimely demise in a railroad disaster by her sister Josephine. Mr. Richard, who happens to be her husband's close friend, is also present at the site. And in fact, Mr. Richard was the first one to receive the news of Mr. Mallard's death. He was in a newspaper office when he sees the list of the victims who got killed in the accident, and Mr. Mallard's name topped the list. He reassures himself by receiving a second telegram, and then he hastened to deliver the news to Mrs. Mallard. Josephine and Mr. Richard, who were the only two present at the uh, site in Mr. Mallard's house to deliver the news to Mrs. Louise Mallard, they were very cautious in delivering the news to Mrs. Mallard because Mrs. Mallard was a heart patient. She was suffering from a heart disease, and so they were very cautious in delivering the news of Mr. Mallard's death to Louise. And we see that when she receives the news, Mrs. Mallard is in great grief. She cries deliberately and then she walks upstairs to be alone in her room. She sits in front of an open window in a chair. She sees trees outside of that open window, smells approaching the rain, peddlers yelling what they are selling on the streets. She even hears somebody singing at a distance. And all of a sudden, she begins to repeat this word to herself: free, free, free. All of a sudden, she begins to repeat these words to herself. Now she realizes that her husband is no more, and now she would be able to live a more independent life. She would be able to enjoy much more independence, much more freedom than she were enjoying in the presence of her husband. She believes that husbands and wives oppress each other in some or the other way, even if they do it out of kindness, but still they oppress each other. And Mrs. Mallard is ecstatic on the thought of having more freedom. She's ecstatic on the thought of having nobody to oppress her. That's what she is realizing as she's sitting in that chair in front of that open window. And we see that now Josephine comes to the door of this room of Mrs. Mallard, and she begs Mrs. Mallard to come out of that room, otherwise she would get sick. Mrs. Mallard initially refuses to open the door to her sister Josephine, but later on she agreed, and as Louis and Josephine were walking down the stairs, the front gate, the front door of the house opens up, and guess who shows up? It was Mr. Mallard. He wasn't present at the site of the accident. He wasn't even aware that an accident had taken place. He was far away from the site of the incident. Now, as Josephine sees Mr. Mallard, she screams, and Mr. Richard unsuccessfully tries to block Louis from viewing Mr. Mallard because that would result in a state of shock to Mrs. Louis would be in a state of shock to see her husband alive. And so Mr. Richard was trying to block Louis from seeing Mr. Mallard, but his attempt was unsuccessful. And then, of course, Mrs. Mallard collapsed. The doctor arrives and he pronounces Mrs. Mallard dead, and he says that she must have died of a heart attack. And in the words of this doctor, he says she had died of heart attack, heart disease, of the joy that kills. So the doctor describes this, untimely demise of Louis Mallard as the joy that kills. It is because of the joy that kills. The author ends this story with a famous quote from Shakespeare, that is, better 3 hours too soon than a minute too late. So, of course, better 3 hours too soon than a minute too late. This is the most beautiful story. It talks about of the incidents that took place in that 1 hour, and so the title of the story is very impressive, The Story of an Hour. Mrs. Mallard, of course, died of a heart disease, and in the words of doctor, it is because of the joy that kills. But we as readers are left to interpret the stories. We see that in that 1 hour, Mrs. Mallard is thinking of the independence that she would enjoy after her husband's demise, because her husband is dead and now she would enjoy more freedom. So she's even ecstatic, she's happy of the thought of receiving more freedom. So, although Louis Maillard died, but we are left to interpret whether she died of the joy that kills or because of the grief of the thought that she would not have independence now, of what she was thinking and of what she was, very happy at. So, I recommend this story to all of you. Please read this story through the link in the description. Story is plain, clear, but still it can have interpretations, whether she died of the joy that kills or she died of the grief of the thought of no independence after her husband's arrival. So please comment your opinions in the comment section, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you very much.